What is up? Today we are going to be playing through negation. And real quick, we'll just go over what that rule means. Basically, the number in each cell just indicates the difference between the number of mines in the black region and the number of mines in the colored region. So you can see here, for instance, this is a 0 clue, and there are 2 mines in the colored region, 2 mines in the black region. You can see here there's a difference of 2 between this, and you can also see that there is still a difference of 2 between these. It's just now it's the black region that has 2 more. And we'll go ahead and just get right into it real quick. Okay, one of the most important concepts for this variant especially, I feel like I've brought up for a few of them now, but is parity, right? So the idea here is, since we know that there is going to be a difference of 1 here, we know that if there are more mines over there, they have to constitute basically a difference of 0, right? So that would be they have to be a pair of colored and uncolored mines. Or there's theoretically other cases, but as long as the parity remains at odd, or rather, yeah, in this case odd, you know it's fine. However, based on the fact there's only 1 cell there, we know that that can't be the case, right? Regardless of whether there's a cell here, nothing there, or vice versa, this one will always result in an even number for this, which is not allowed. So, there we are. Similarly, we can see here that we know exactly one of these 2 must be filled in, right? Just based off the idea that we always know there's going to be 1 here, which means in order to get back down to 0, it needs to hit an odd number, in this case 1. And the idea of an odd number is it could also theoretically be something where it's like, it gets 1 of these, and then it gets these 2, which sum up to 0. But anyway, so that tells us there's going to be 1 here. What that also then means is that, well, I guess it doesn't actually tell us much else beyond that yet, but we can potentially get more information. Something else that we can kind of consider from this board state is what exactly this 2 is going to mean. Because one thing we do know is since there is 1 cell at least on here, we know, or rather there's exactly 1 cell there, we know there has to be at least 1 cell here filled in, right? So that means that at best this 2 is going to be a 0. So that also then tells us there has to be at least 1 down here. It could even be that both of these are filled in, but we don't necessarily know that for sure yet. Alright. One other thing that we can kind of see here is that exactly one of these cells is going to be filled in here, right? That's just once again based off of the parity of the 2 clue. We know that we can't have an even number. What's actually interesting in the respect that we can split this 3 clue up into 2 possible cases. There's this case where it's all the yellows, and this case, rather, where it's all the colored cells, and this case where it's all the uncolored cells. Actually, something we can notice here is that if we assume the yellow case, which also carries this assumption, we actually don't have enough mines left for the 2. So we then know that it must look like this. And there we are. By the parity argument we talked about earlier, we know that only an odd number of cells here can be shaded for this 1, 2 pair of clues, so we know this one is not shaded. And what we also now know, since we have gone through and got rid of this one, is that this is a mine for the 0 clue. We can just finish that real quick, with the idea being that we already know 1 black cell has to be filled in to put put this value back down to 0. There aren't any more to fill in, so we can just say that one is not a mine. And you can see here this clue is also finished. As is this 1 clue, this currently adds up to 0, so there we are. And this 2 clue is also only finishable with a 3-1 kind of pair. That also finishes up the 0 clue, and thus that 0 clue. And this also tells us that this 2 needs to have this one filled in as well. And incidentally, we can also think about this 2, where we know that this one can't be a mine because that puts it to 0, and then you can only really get it up to 1 at most, so we know it is this set. Now then, by the parity argument we talked about earlier, we know that since there's 1 mine here, this must sum up to an even number of mines being put here. So we can then just fill this one as a mine. And another way to kind of think about it is, since this one's already going to have a total difference of 1, then we can't do something where, like, for instance, we have like 2, or we have 1 black one here, but then we put 2 gray ones there, which by the fact this 2 is already there, we know that this has to sum up to 0. Anyway, I don't know if that makes sense, maybe not. But in order to finish up this 1 clue, we know that that must be a mine. That also tells us that for these 1 clues, this must be a mine. And that actually gives us all of the mines on the board. You can see we have none remaining, so there we are. hopefully that was somewhat comprehensible. If not, another way you can kind of think about it is that the colored mines are negative mines, right? And then we're just taking the absolute value of their sum. Maybe that's a more intuitive way to think about it. I'm not completely sure. Anyway, we're now going to move on to a more difficult one of these. Let's go and get into it. Okay. So the first thing that we can notice here is we actually know what this 3 is, because if we assume it is these 3, then this 0 actually already has too many colored cells around it, where we're not able to balance it back out since there's only one black cell. Thus we know that these 3 are our 3. Alright. Similarly, this 3 is already finished, and by parity we know that this 1 can only have one mine above it, so there we are. Okay. The next thing that we can notice here is just from this difference we know there will be exactly one mine up here. We can kind of consider some potential cases for it, I guess. I don't know if this will be helpful or not, but if that mine is here, for instance, we know or for this 2 clue to work, we know the other mine must be down there, which then tells us that in order to balance things out, this all must be the case. If we alternatively think about the situation where the mine is here, we can see that once again this 1 clue is finished, and more importantly we can see that this one is never a mine. So there we are. We actually also now know that the yellow case that we're looking at is the correct one, because is the incorrect one. Sorry, I misspoke. Because in the yellow case, this 1 clue has no mines around it, which would make it a 0. So we can then fill in this. We know this one is not a mine to finish that up, and there we are. Alright, we also know that this must be the case, and this tells us for this 2 that we need another mine down there. There we are. Now then, for this 1 clue, we've actually reached a point where we know that that is the only way to get the sum to balance up. This 0 clue is just finished. There we are. Similar idea with the 1 clue really is we know the only way to get this one up to a total of 2 is to put another mine here and put that one as a non-mine. So there we are. Same idea applies with 0. Okay. So now we have reach a point where it's looking like we're probably going to have to use some idea based around the total mine count. What I'm kind of thinking is, we know that there's going to be exactly 1 mine in this region, right? So then what that tells us is that of the other 2 mines, we know at least 1 must be up here. But if 1 is up there, then that actually implies that both are up there, just because 1 being up here either puts the total to 3 or 1, depending on where you put it. So that tells us that both of these are mines, and this one down here is not a mine. But by the knowledge that one is not a mine, we know this one also cannot be a mine, or else the 0 clue will not be fulfilled. So there we are. Alright, that went pretty quickly. I think I'll go ahead and do another real quick before moving on. So first, we can just see this 2 clue is already finished. There were only 2 open colored cells and less open uncolored cells, so there we are. Alright. Now, something interesting we can actually note here is, given this kind of setup of differences, we know not only that there's exactly 1 mine in each of these, just because we need to get to a difference of 2, right? So first of all, we know there's going to have to be some overlap, but we can also see here, we can only get at most, like, I guess a difference of 1 through here, because if we do this, it just cancels out. So that would tell us, in this case, that the other mine would be up there, right? And then with this region would have something like 1 mine there or whatever, or maybe 2 mines here and 1 mine up there or something. Similarly, we can see in this assumption, this is like the kind of area we'd be looking at. And of course I can go ahead real quick and clarify some of it, and if we're going with the yellow case, then we can see that all of this is true. And this is just kind of following standard negation logic. And I could also just mark this real quick. If we're going down the red case, then we can see that these are both now filled in. This one is a mine. This one over here is not. And we also then know that at least one of these 2 must be mine. That doesn't tell us anything on its own. Okay, it looks like that might be most of the information we get from the red case. Unfortunately, less useful, looks like, or doesn't give as much information as the other one. Except, not actually necessarily. For this 0 clue here, we can see that in the red case, so we've already gotten rid of the only colored cell it has, so we know all of these also cannot be mines. Lo and behold, we have a common mine, or a common non-mine, rather. So we can go ahead and just mark that real quick. Now then, does this change things for the red case? Yes, it does. Because here's the thing. Now, there's no ambiguity with where the remaining mines are in that case. Right, the reason why I was unsure in the first case is because we could have something like this, or we could have had a mine here, and then that would put a mine in the bottom row and mess things up. But now, we can see through our case-wise deduction that this is also never a mine. And what this tells us is that either both of these up here are mines or neither are. So that just tells us that the yellow case is not accurate, and that's just by the parity logic from earlier. So we can see the red case must be correct, and that's kind of supported by this similar deduction we can make. So there we are, and I'll just go ahead real quick and get rid of all that. Put a mine up there, and there we are. Okay. For this 2 clue, we know that there must be one more mine right there. There we are. Similarly, for this 2 clue, in order to finish up this 1 clue, we need a colored mine there. Okay. So now we have reached a point where we're realistically going to have to think about the remaining mine count. First of all, we know there's at least 1 mine in here, right? Specifically, we know there's at least 1 mine in this group right here. Something else we can then consider is this puts our remaining mines up to 3, right? However, we know that both of these groups must need 2 mines in them, right? So that means regardless of where the remaining mines go, if they even go in one of those at all, which it looks like they'll have to, we know that there must be another mine at least around this 0. So what that really tells us is that there are now a total of 3 of our additional mines in kind of this box here, right? And then that means there's 1 mine outside of it. We know that mine can't be in here because it would just need another mine. It can be here, though, because this box overlaps part of it. So I think what this implies is both of these are mines. This is not a mine. And we now know in order to finish up the 0 clue, we need 2 mines there. So there we are. And, okay, from here I'm going to go ahead and go over to some combinations now. Let's get into it. The first one we'll do, I guess, is negation quad. Oof. It's one of the ones that doesn't have 100. Interesting. Oh well. Okay, so first of all, we just know by a normal negation logic that the 2 mines for this 2 clue are right here. That also tells us where this 2 clue's mines are and where that 0 clue's mines are. Okay, cool. So the next thing we can consider here. Okay, so first of all, we know at least in the case of this 1 that there's going to have to be a mine in this box, at least. So here, we can actually just mark that as one of these 2 is a mine. Of course, if this one right here is a mine, then we know that at least one of these must be a mine. Similarly, in the context of a mine there, that doesn't tell us necessarily anything else about the mine below it, but at least tells us there was 1 mine there. And also, we still know that there have to be more mines in both of these cases around this 0, just because of quad logic. Right, there are empty boxes. Okay. And I guess there is always a case where just both of these are mines. So I'm not sure how fruitful that is going to be. One thing that we can consider is we know that there must be 1 mine in each of these, so what that tells us then is that there are 2 mines in one of these rows and 1 mine in the other to satisfy this 1. It also means that there's at least 1 mine here and 1 mine here. But we know this offset is going to be offset by a little, right? Just because there will once again be 2 in one row, 1 in the other row. So that tells us that there will be either 1 or 3 mines up here. Right. So we can go ahead and I guess just mark that with a line right here or something similar. So there we are. And of course, if all 3 of them are filled in, then this line also works perfectly fine as an indicator for any of them. But now, let's think real quick. Okay. So first of all, there is I think the first case I'm going to consider is one where this 0 just doesn't have anything around it. And that could just more so honestly be generalized, but just the case where this cell is not filled in. That's what our initial assumption will be, because that implies these just through negation logic. So then we know that there must be a cell filled in here, both of these filled in, and this filled in as well. We can go ahead and mark that real quick. And so, now then, I don't know if this gives us a lot. What we do know, though, is there's always going to be a cell in one of these 2, so in this case it'll be right here. And then this tells us very little about this group of 2, other than there is well, there's either one mine there or no mines there, so that's something to think about. But otherwise, we know that there also will always be a mine in this region, and something interesting we can note is that if that mine is down here, then there also has to be a mine up there for the gray region. Not necessarily inverse though, so we just know that there will be a mine there as well. Now, let's consider what happens if this one is red instead. First of all, we know then that there is going to be one mine going across here exactly. And admittedly, I was kind of hoping the other case would have found some contradiction. Doesn't look like it though, so that's okay. So we can just go ahead and mark this with like a row here, or a column there, or something. Okay. So now then, one thing then this implies, given the fact that there's one up here already, we know that regardless of whether this is the only one or there are two more, that it'll always be offset by just one black one up there, right? So that means that there need to be two gray ones. So what this actually tells us, first of all, is that this must be the case, and that that one up there is never a mine. And then in this case, there's also one down there. So we can mark that as a non-mine. Go ahead and continue thinking now. Okay, so here we go. In the yellow case, we've run into an issue with satisfying this 2 clue. Since regardless of how many we try to fill in, like if we fill in this, it puts it to 0, otherwise it's at 1, and there's nothing else we can add to it. So we know that it's the red case, which is that. There we are. Okay. And so now then, let's continue to think. So first of all, if this one is filled in, then in order to satisfy this 2 clue, we also know this one must be filled in, and this one must not be filled in, but that overloads this 0, so we know this one isn't filled in, and thus by parity, that one is also not filled in. Now we know that either one of these or both of these, or rather, sorry, either both or none of those are filled in. So that tells us that this area of clues, at least for, well, no, since because of quad, we know in that case, with this kind of structure, always must be that both of these are filled in. Similarly, we can see the same thing over here. Both of them, this must be filled in. So there we go. The next thing I guess we need to consider is, okay, what happens with each of these? First of all, we can see through the idea that if we put in this, we had to fill in both of these, that this one will always be a mine. So there we are. And that actually finishes up the 0 clue. There aren't any more mines we can put around it. So we can mark that as well, finish up the 1 clue. And now we can go ahead and consider this 2 clue, I guess. Okay, well here's something interesting to think about. Instead, what I'm going to start with is, first of all, I'll just mark that this row is here, again, because it's going to be relevant for our mine count. Let's think about this 1 clue. If there's another mine there, then we know there have to be 2 mines. But that already puts us up to 3 and leaves this box with no mines in it. So we know none of these could be mines. Then we can finish up this 2 clue, finish up that 2 clue, and that 2 clue, and see that we have 2 mines left. We know there's 1 mine exactly in that region, so there we go. But we need to still finish up this 1 clue, so there we go. That finishes up the puzzle. And I guess, real quick, I will do probably one more of these and then call it good. We'll go ahead and do a negation outside. If you don't recall outside from last time, go rewatch the video. I don't know what to tell you. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do is see by parity that this one must be a mine. That's a fairly standard deduction from there. Okay, next thing I'm going to consider is what happens if this one here is a mine. First of all, we know, or finish up at 0, this one must also be a mine. We can mark that as a non-mine. And then we can see this one needs to head up to go to an edge, but also needs to go over there. And then we've kind of reached a point where one set of these 2 need to be a mine. If these ones, though, are both mines, we get the checkerboard pattern from earlier, the much dreaded checkerboard pattern, so we know that neither of those can be mines. But now we've reached a contradiction, where for this one to be for this 1 clue to be satisfied, there can be no more mines here, but you can see we still have the checkerboard pattern. So thus we can conclude that this one up here is not a mine. There we are. So by parity, we know this one must be a mine once again, and we can see that this 2 is either going to be both of these, which is a checkerboard pattern again, or it's going to be this set. So there we are. And that finishes up the 0 and thus the 1. Alright. We can also see, this is a pattern that I actually don't think came off the negation video, but if you do have a checkerboard pattern and there's a mine or a non-mine right there, then we know there must be a mine here to finish up like rounding the corner. So there we are. Something else we can consider here is this one's already satisfied. If there's going to be one mine in there, then there have to be two. But that's telling us is that this one can't be a mine, because regardless of where we put the other mine, the checkerboard panel will always come back. It doesn't necessarily tell us that none of these are mines, because these could both be mines and it would still be satisfied, though. That's something important to watch out for. Okay. So now, similarly, since we know that this will, well, I guess at worst what this will do is reduce this parity back down to 0. So what we have is either, if both of these are filled in like this, then all we really know is just that there will be 1 or 3 of these filled in. Is not clear. In the case, though, where neither of these are filled in, which here I'll move this yellow one over to the side slightly, then what we know is there are 2 blank ones. In order to get down to 1, we need to just fill in that one and put the rest of them as non-mines, which is interesting. Something I'm going to do instead, though, because I'm realizing I'm missing something down here, is I'm just going to finish up this 1 clue because it's done, and thus also these 0 clues, and that 0 clue. In order to finish up this 2, there's only one way to do it. You can see right there. So there we are. Okay. Something interesting to note now is we know this one down here needs to connect up there. In the yellow case, we actually know it has to kind of go through here because this mine is already placed. So that always tells us that this one is a non-mine. But it also tells us that in the yellow case, this one up here is our final mine around the 1, which is interesting. Okay. Something else to note in the yellow case is this one must head down like this, so we also know this one down here is no longer a mine. Similarly, actually, in the red case, we know that either one, or none or both of these are mines, either 0 or both. In order to connect up, though, we know neither of these can be mines, so we can go ahead and fill in both of those. There we are. By parity, we know that an odd number of these must be mines, so that must be the last one. Now that we can consider, once again, our cases, in the yellow case, that one is a mine, this one is not. And in the red case, we can see that either neither of these or both of these are mines. If neither are, then we break outside rules, so there we are. And we can see here that, well, hold on. Now, how did I get this for the yellow case? The yellow case should also be that this one is not a mine. I was miscounting for this one. That is my bad. Let's reconsider it. So in the yellow case, we know neither of these ones can be mines. In the red case, we see that we need specifically 1 colored mine, so this one must be a mine, and that one cannot be a mine. This one, this is just never a mine, and we can see now we have a 0 clue here. This one's already finished. This allows us just to kind of work our logic backwards. We have 3 squares left, 3 mines left. We also know this must be the yellow case where both of these are mines anyway. So there we are. Cool. Okay. I think that is going to do it for this video. Eventually, when we kind of go back to covering stuff again, you will get to experience the glory of multiple negation. It's a process, but that is not for us today. Next time, we'll be moving on. Have a good one.